And now to an ABC 3340 News exclusive. We're speaking with one of the lead investigators in the Kahleb Collins case in Fayette County. We followed the case from every angle, from the initial crash to the searches for the toddler and his mother's guilty plea. Here's the I-Team's Gracie Johnson.
Fayette County Sheriff's Office got a call, responded to a single vehicle wreck on December the 8th of 2024.
At first, deputies thought they were working a deadly crash. According to Aaliyah, Stephen Collins was driving when his truck ran off Fayette County Road 73 and hit a tree. His 2-year-old daughter, Riley, died at the scene. Stephen Collins died the next day, and Wendy Bailey was seriously injured. A crash report later found Collins was driving an estimated 92 miles an hour in a 45-mile-an-hour zone on a wet road. It also found neither adult was wearing a seatbelt and Riley wasn't in a car seat. But within 24 hours, the investigation took a turn no one expected.
On December the 9th, we get a call from the grandmother of Kahleb and Riley, which would be Wendy Bailey's mother. And she was asking questions regarding Kahleb. To my knowledge, that's the first time Kahleb's name was mentioned at any point.
Collins says investigators immediately returned to the crash scene to make sure Kahleb hadn't somehow been involved.
During that process, I made contact with the grandmother. She actually arrived at the sheriff's office, and she had the grandfather with her. And it was at that time is when we learned that Kahleb had not been seen or heard from since approximately October.
Instead of trying to figure out how a crash happened, investigators were suddenly trying to figure out what happened to a 1-year-old little boy they say hadn't been seen in months.
We go from looking for a baby at a wreck scene to looking for remains within just a matter of really like maybe an hour.
Investigators immediately began pulling cell phone records, reviewing social media, and gathering other digital evidence while returning to the family's property.
One thing led to the next, and which led us back out to the residence, and that's where the search began.
Over the next several days, investigators searched the property over and over again. I asked Collins whether Wendy Bailey was cooperative during the investigation.
No, she was not cooperative. And that was one of the challenges that we faced was, obviously misleading information.
Collins says investigators examined everything on the property, but inside the home, they say something immediately stood out.
Everything was kind of in place, wasn't anything really out of place. But one thing we did notice immediately was the fact that Kahleb didn't have any belongings in the house.
Collins says investigators also compared what they were seeing inside the home with photographs recovered during the investigation. He says the room where Kahleb and Riley had stayed appeared to belong only to Riley. That, investigators say, raised even more questions.
Kahleb had been removed. That's kind of what set us out on to look further, not necessarily within the house, but let's search the property.
Just over a week after the crash, the first arrest came. On December 17th, investigators charged Kahleb's grandfather, John Bailey, with failing to report a missing child.
He lived with Wendy and the kids and the father. He was the primary caretaker for the children while mom and dad were away at work.
Less than 2 weeks later, investigators arrested Wendy Bailey. She was charged with abuse of a corpse, aggravated child abuse, first-degree domestic violence, and criminally negligent homicide related to the crash that killed Riley. The day after her arrest, court records publicly revealed what investigators say they uncovered. According to those court records, prosecutors allege Kahleb was repeatedly abused by his father, Stephen Collins. They say investigators recovered photographs showing the toddler bound with rope and zip ties, suspended from a loft, and physically assaulted. Prosecutors also allege Stephen Collins texted Wendy Bailey photographs showing Kahleb injured, along with messages indicating he believed the child had died. Prosecutors allege Bailey failed to intervene or report the abuse.
Those photos were as described. This was absolutely the most horrific, evil thing I've ever seen in my life. How someone could do that to another human being. And not only a human being, a child, a helpless child, child being their own.
The search continued for months. Then, 5 months after the investigation began, investigators announced they had found human remains in a burn pile on the family's property they believed were Kahleb's. I asked Collins whether investigators know if that burn pile was Kahleb's final resting place.
I can't say one way or the other. Based on the evidence that I've got and the evidence that we have, and the statements that we've, obtained throughout this whole process, it's hard to tell.
While investigators say they believe the remains were Kahleb's, I also asked whether they were ever able to positively identify them.
What I will tell you is that it was identified as human remains by the forensic anthropologist, and the fact that it was in the burn pile, where evidence that we had gathered led us to the burn pile. I went back and done research as far as have there been any other missing children in the area in the past 10 years? No. So, at that point, the likelihood of it being Kahleb was, 99.9%.
The investigation continued for more than a year after that discovery, and in July 2026, Wendy Bailey pleaded guilty to first-degree domestic violence and aggravated child abuse involving a child younger than 6. A Fayette County judge sentenced her to 2 consecutive life sentences, the maximum punishment allowed by law for those convictions. Bailey's attorney said after sentencing that she accepted responsibility and that she had also been a victim of domestic violence at the hands of Stephen Collins, while acknowledging that did not erase what happened to Kahleb. What began as a deadly crash investigation had become one of the most disturbing child abuse cases these investigators say they've ever worked. After everything investigators uncovered, Collins says the guilty plea brought some closure.
I think justice was served, without a doubt. There's no doubt in my mind, Wendy Bailey was likely a victim of domestic violence, but that does not excuse the fact of the actions and the participation that she had during the course of this awful, evil abuse.
John Bailey's case remains pending, and he is currently scheduled to appear on the Fayette County plea docket in September 2026. Gracie Johnson, ABC 3340 I-Team.